All right. Good morning, folks. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is Monday, June 30th, and we have before us one docket matter. But before we get into it, we will recognize our existence with the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Bogue. Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great. Great to see everybody. Hope everybody had a nice warm weekend, it being fairly cold outside. This is a continuance of our docket from last Wednesday, which was continued to last Thursday, and then we still needed a little more time. So we are taking up docket 2011000261. This is an enforcement matter involving KP Kaufman. If we could elevate the attorneys for KP Kaufman as well as attorneys for staff, we will get going. Good morning, Mr. Jacobs. Good morning, Ms. Stafford. Good to see you both.
Morning.
At this point, we are at KPK Cross of staff's second witness, Nikki Graber. Before we move into questions and answerings, are there any procedural matters from either side? First, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have a procedural matter. We've, like staff, prepared some demonstrative slides to aid in the more efficient testimony of our rebuttal witnesses to follow Ms. Graber's testimony. And there is site status information as well as pictures testified about by staff in those slides. These were sent to Ms. Stafford within the last hour, and we just wanted to make sure there was not an issue with that before we attempt to bring those up with our first rebuttal witness. We also cleared another demonstrative, some graphs prepared from COGCC data by Mr. Totkus and sent those, I believe, last Friday to Ms. Stafford, and she said she had no objection to them.
Good morning, Ms. Stafford. Do you have any response to the demonstrative exhibit suggestion from Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, Chair Robbins. For the record, Caitlin Stafford, Assistant Attorney General. This demonstrative exhibit was shared within the last half an hour with me. I really haven't had the chance to look through it right now, so I would just lodge a standing objection to its use.
Mr. Chairman, you're on mute.
We can't hear you.
It's because I have a new microphone because Commissioner McGowan was complaining that I couldn't be heard. Ms. Stafford, I agree that 30 minutes ago is fairly not timely. We can keep a standing objection. If you want, we could provide you 10-15 minutes right now to review it with your client. I'm not sure what's best, but I would give you that opportunity, and we could just hold everything for a bit.
Thank you, Chair. I think it'd probably be preferable to get going. I will have members of my team review it in the meantime, and then potentially I can withdraw the objection once KPK is ready to use it.
Okay, your call. Again, we're happy to give you and your guys some time to review it ahead of time, but if you want to move forward, then we can move forward. Anything further, Mr. Jacobs?
No, I think that's it.
Ms. Stafford, did you have anything on your end procedurally?
Just one thing, Mr. Chair. In reviewing last Thursday's hearing, both I and members of our team, it seems like there may have been at least, I don't know if there was an action taken with respect to a request I had made, a second request I had made to admit the staff's exhibits that still had KPK objections attached to them. I just wanted to make sure that request was at least recognized and moved, or at least decided upon. I wanted to make sure the record is clear on that.
Okay, Mr. Jacobs, actually, let me ponder a bit about that. What I probably would like to do is take that under advisement, note that we'll, deal with it before your case in chief is over. That actually gives my AAG an opportunity to look into this and try to help me out in terms of where we're going with it. Would that be acceptable at this point? And then we can move forward and then make sure I pick that back up before you close your case in chief.
That would be acceptable. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further from anybody?
Not at this time.
No.
All right, then we will elevate Ms. Graber. All right, Ms. Graber, good morning. Good to have you with us. And at this point, you are subject to cross-examination from Mr. Jacobs. So with that, Mr. Jacobs and Ms. Graber, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Graber. Thanks for your testimony on Thursday. I have a number of questions for you on cross-exam. A number of the demonstrative slides used during your testimony last Thursday contained the original GRIP implementation schedule for the locations you covered. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But those implementation schedules were proposed by Marcom's prior project manager with the GRIP draft submitted to staff on January 31, 2022. Is that also correct?
Yes,
And the implementation schedules for remedial work are required to be updated on a quarterly basis by rule. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Thank you. You issue more COAs, conditions of approval, to KPK than to other operators as a general matter. Would you agree?
Objection. Relevance.
I'm headed in the direction of review of forms, and I'd like to continue that line of examination.
I believe if the witness can answer it, it's an appropriate question.
Please answer the question, or I can restate it.
It's project specific.
And Mr. Duranlo testified with a demonstrative about how staff crafted a special forms review process just for KPK. You recall that, don't you?
I do.
You and your staff in the DJ Basin Group follow that process for KPK forms review and examine the many COAs imposed upon KPK in its many forms 27 in process, don't you?
Yes,
And that takes more time to review KPK forms with many COAs using a special review process than your review of forms for other operators, doesn't it?
yes, we believe it's required.
I believe you testified last Thursday about GRIP implementation and used slide 9 of your staff demonstrative to discuss KPK performance with respect to staging impacted soils on site, the maintenance of BMPs to control stormwater runoff and the like. Do you recall that?
Did it have a photo of the Paul Hines and the Lagio Gorman?
Yes, that's the slide.
Okay.
So you do recall that. And those two photos, one showing staged soils at Paul Hines #1 flow line on December 12, 2022, and the other with staged soils at Ladkio Gorman header on the same date, correct?
I believe so, without reviewing the photos.
Yeah. With respect to the Paul Hines photo, if we could pull that up, Mr. Killian. Isn't it true that staff exhibit 1168, the inspection report for December 12, 2022, when the photo was taken, indicates stockpiled waste in this very photo is being stored and handled in compliance with Rule 913 B5 B4. Mr. Killian, if you could pull up that exhibit 1168.
Mr. Jacobs, excuse me, we don't have Mr. Killian in as a panelist. What is his, I'm trying to find him now. What is his first name?
We're pausing the clock, I hope.
Yes, we did, as I came on the screen
Okay,
about
thank you so
30
much.
seconds ago.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we're getting him in just a moment.
Mr. Jacobs, in that light, are there other members of your team that you would like impaneled so that you don't end up having to wait and pause the clock? Which
Mr.
we're doing now?
Killian is running our slides and exhibits. He's not counsel of record in the docket, but he's an associate here at the firm and part of our team. So he is the only additional person who's not been elevated. But I see that 1168 is up. So with that, I think we can resume the cross-examination. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Could I just lodge an objection to the use of this exhibit as KPK has objected to it itself?
This is rebuttal, and staff has discussed the Paul Hines location and used a photo, and this inspection report contains the photo and talks about whether or not the photo is in compliance with rule. I believe I'm entitled to cross this witness on that subject.
Then I would re-ask the commissioners to reconsider my request regarding the exhibit staff has marked so that council can refer to facts in evidence.
Then we'll consider this 1168 in evidence. And at this point, we'll continue to take it up one at a time.
Thank you. Ms. Graber, restating my question then. So do you understand that this inspection report identifies that very same photo from slide 9 as in compliance with Rule 913?
May I see the photo?
You may. And the highlighted question and response of the inspector is there to the left. Can you read that?
I can read that.
Please do.
Okay. Stockpile waste stored and handled in compliance with Rule 913 B5 B4. The response is yes.
Thank you. And isn't it also true that the landowner at the Ladkey O'Gorman site depicted on slide 9 has refused to allow KPK access to the site for extended periods of time?
Objection, relevance.
I believe it's entirely relevant, if I may respond. There's
Go
a
ahead.
picture of a soil pile and our client has no access to the site. I would ask that the witness answer the question. Are you aware of site access issues with the Ladkey O'Gorman site?
And I'll let the question in.
Okay. The Lackey O'Gormans have been quite friendly with us and issued multiple complaints. I have not been part of any negotiations between KPK and the landowner.
You also testified last Thursday about the soil spread field NOAB site and displayed slide 22 of your staff demonstrative. Do you recall that?
I'm without looking directly at the slide. I'm
Mr.
familiar with the
Killian,
spread field. I'm not. I'd like
Slide
to see the slide.
22.
Thank
There
you.
we go. Do you recall this slide as part of your testimony last Thursday?
I do.
The photo on the lower right of slide 22 is from staff exhibit 1023, is a drone camera photo taken by staff reclamation specialist, correct?
Yes.
And that drone camera obtained the image used in staff's October 19 update, which Mr. Killian hopefully is now also displaying. Do you recall that?
It's not up on the screen.
Okay. Do you recall talking about drone imagery taken on October 11th at the October 19th update?
I do.
And I believe you presented to this commission during the October update that the image indicates poor plant health. Do you recall that?
I actually did not say that.
I submit to you that in the recording of that update at 1 hour, 42 minutes, 9 seconds, you state the reclamation imagery on the right indicates plant health, referring to the drone image being shared by Mr. Killian from staff's update slide. You deny stating that?
I said that if you turn on the plant health layer, you can see the area disturbed. It was a visual aid using red, blue, green.
Turning to your testimony regarding the NESU consolidated NOAB site and your use of staff demonstrative slide 24 in connection with that testimony, isn't it true that determining background for inorganics and soil at this site remains an open issue?
The NESU?
Yes.
Yes, it does. There's also organics in situ still.
And as a consequence of that issue, KPK cannot proceed with closure.
Because of the organics, definitely, and the inorganics need further discussion.
Turning to your testimony about Facility 4 North depicted on staff slide 25 of its demonstrative, isn't it true that the release at that location is from a 3-inch steel line, and KPK has represented to you that it has never operated 3-inch steel lines?
Objection, compound question.
Split them up, Mr. Jacobs.
Isn't it true that this release is from a 3-inch steel line?
I was not the area environmental protection specialist at the time of the spill, so I was not part of the root cause determination, so I cannot speak to that.
Now, with respect to the many conditions of approval imposed upon KPK's Form 27 for CPA locations, would you agree that those CPAs are all imposing requirements grounded in the COGCC rules themselves?
Can you rephrase that question?
You don't make up COAs, do you?
No,
They're based on rules, aren't they?
correct.
Thank you. And the requirements of COGCC rules apply to all operators Forms 27, don't they?
Correct.
So for example, the requirements to submit an implementation schedule in an initial Form 27 and to update those schedules quarterly in Forms 27 supplemental for sites involving remediation, that's the same for all operators, correct?
Correct.
And the same holds true for waste manifests. All operators are required by rule to provide waste manifests with their Forms 27 supplemental to document waste disposition, right?
No, they should keep it on record and make it available.
What about for taking an adequate number of background samples? That applies to all operators submitting remediation work plans, correct?
Correct.
And do you and the other environmental protection specialists under you in the DJ Basin Group apply these requirements consistently to all operators Forms 27 supplemental?
It's site specific. It's not a simple background determination can be used if the spill is simple and the geology is simple and the cleanup is quick and efficient. If the geology is complex and the spill is complex and there's a long time between the spill and the cleanup, it requires additional investigation. You have to compare apples to apples.
Thank you. But it is true, is it not, that you and your staff allow other operators to not comply with a number of these requirements? You have that kind of discretion and you routinely exercise it, don't you?
Objection, compound question.
I'll break it up. You and your staff allow other operators to not comply with these requirements I've used as examples. Is that correct?
That's incorrect.
Do you agree that you have discretion and you routinely exercise it?
Yes, on a site specific basis.
In fact, you and your staff have allowed other operators recently to not comply with these very requirements as documented in 3 Forms 27 that I am briefly screen sharing for impeachment purposes. These forms have been redacted to remove obvious operator information, though the document and remediation numbers are not redacted. Mr. Killian, if you could show us the first form in which staff approved this operator's NFA request, despite the operator only taking one background sample, and that background sample exceeded the table 915-1 value for arsenic. Scrolling to that area of the form right here, number of samples, 1 exceeding 915-1. Were background samples collected as part of this investigation. Laboratory analytical indicated that arsenic is naturally high in the soil used to construct the tank battery. Reading from that field. You see that?
Mr.
I
Jacobs, could you please slow down with the witness? She has not had an opportunity to look through what your colleague is scrolling through so quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm going to give the witness the opportunity to be in charge of the scrolling. Let them scroll however you like so that you can familiarize yourself with the exhibit. And then at that point, we'll have questions about it. So you tell Mr. Killian what you want him to do so that you can become familiar with the exhibit. And let us know when you're familiar.
Mr. Killian, can you please scroll down to the project purpose and site information box? Perfect. Okay, it's a tank battery. Decommissioning. Okay, can you scroll down? Site conditions. Perfect. And a little further. Okay, and can you show the entire other investigation box? Excellent. And source removal summary. Okay, and scroll down. Yep, keep going. Final report. Okay, and additional waste disposal information. Can you scroll to show all of that? Excellent. Okay, I'm ready to discuss this project.
And this
Okay,
is,
Mr. Jacobs, go forward.
this is approval of an NFA request, is it not?
It is.
By Ms. Carrie Brown, who works for you.
It's Kari Brown. but
Sorry,
yes.
excuse me. My apologies. Answered, she works for you.
Correct.
Turning to next form.
Can I speak to something else about this project? Am
I
allowed?
am directing the questions here and I'm under,
Okay.
assignment, so I'd like to go to the next form. Thank you.
Okay.
Actually, let's go to the third form, Mr. Killian.
And then similarly, Mr. Jacobs, if you're going to be asking about it, if we could give her a chance to get familiar
Yes.
first.
Certainly.
Ms. Graber, feel free to ask Mr. Killian to move it around for yourself.
You see that this report was taken by you, correct?
Yes. All right, go and scroll down.
Yes.
Okay. And keep going. Site conditions, if you could freeze there. Okay. 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 11 samples. Okay, scroll down to the background section. Thank you.
I have just one question.
Okay, I'd like to read through it so I understand the full project before we discuss, if that's okay. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Okay.
Is it true that you did not require waste manifests to be provided with this form 27? Looking at the attachment checklist, you don't see any waste manifests there, do you?
Nope.
No further questions of this witness.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. Thank you, Ms. Graber. Ms. Stafford, at this point, I believe you are entitled to redirect.
Thank you,
Are you
Chair.
ready for redirect now? Do you want to take a few minutes to get ready for redirect?
I'm 100% ready for redirect.
Go for it.
Ms. Graber, council just asked you two questions about rebuttal exhibits purporting to show NFA requests for different operators. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, I believe you were interrupted, but can you briefly explain maybe why those are different
Yeah.
than from ones you typically deal with from KPK?
Yeah, absolutely. So that first one, if you actually look just below what was highlighted, it says no impacts were encountered during this investigation. So the operator had done a equipment removal. I don't remember exactly what they removed, but they removed the equipment. They did a thorough investigation. They found no indication of a release at all. The only exceedance was arsenic. They took one background sample. This falls under that simple incident, simple background determination. So since no indication of a spill existed, forcing them to collect 10 samples would be cost prohibitive and a waste of time and energy since nothing actually got spilled.
Thank you, Ms. Graber. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stafford, for the redirect. At this time, I believe that our order of play is that Ms. Graber is available for questions from commissioners. Who would like to go first? If anybody. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Graber, for your testimony. And perhaps I can ask for staff's help on this. One thing I'd like to look at is, and I apologize in advance, I'm not 100% sure if this was admitted or not, but I believe it's Exhibit 1207. Maybe it'd be helpful to know at the outset if that was objected to or not.
Based, may I speak? I'm sorry. Based on my notes, it does not appear to have received an objection, and I will share my screen for you.
Thank you. Okay.
And I don't know if you want to look through the entire email chain here or not, but could you briefly describe what this exhibit is?
So this is the James Haley. I don't know if it has all the correspondence on there. This form, I can speak without truly reviewing it because I'm pretty familiar here. This form had 7 return to drafts. We did a lot of back and forth with the operator and the primary contractor, trying to determine where the samples were, what they were trying to do for a background. We went back and forth, like I said, 7 times. At some point, I believe it was out between the 5th and the 6th return to drafts, we had a meeting with them. I had requested that our drone team fly a drone aerial imagery so that we could sit down and once and for all just determine that between field notes and GPS that we had figured out where the sample points were, because they kept moving everywhere. And so it was a really big red flag. We were really concerned. So when we sat down with the primary contractor and the operator, we showed them the aerial imagery and said, okay, where are these samples? Let's get this figured out. And it turned out that the excavation was larger than it had been previously sampled. So all the samples we had been trying to determine were null since there was no step outs. And then I remember it was Friday the 13th, we went out and witnessed another round of sampling at this location. And it turns out that there are hydrocarbon impacts below the flow line, which is a preferential flow line path. So I believe the primary contractor, just based on visual aids, didn't run that analysis and scheduled additional excavation there.
Thank you. And to clarify, the samples that are being done, were those background samples or were those samples to check for environmental impacts?
Both.
Both. Okay. And I guess one more clarification point to begin with is the James S. Haley trustee B number 2, is that a GRIP site or is that one of the NOAB sites?
It's a GRIP site.
Okay. And if Ms. Stafford, if you could perhaps scroll down just a little bit further to the second email here. That's an email that was sent by you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so December 29th, this would have been kind of in the back and forth, like maybe I think you said 5th or so. Is this at the point in time before you had met about trying to do the joint imagery and trying to figure this out?
I believe this is the email that kicked off the meeting.
Okay, and I want to look at one of the last sentences there. It said, while the COA has not been met, in the interest of progress on this project, COGCC is willing to waive that COA if KPK can provide supporting evidence showing the actual location of these sample points. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure that I understand the supporting evidence was not shown, which led to the meetings later, correct?
Yes. So Rule 216 requires, I don't have the accuracy off the top of my head, but it requires accurate accurate points, accurate field measurements. We had applied a rule that all sample points should be collected in compliance with Rule 216. And based off of how far the sample points were moving with each reiterative change, it was demonstrating that they had not been collected in compliance with that rule. So in the effort of getting this whole backfill, we were willing to waive it if we could just figure out where everything was and just all come to a conclusion.
Okay. And from this point forward, has COGCC waived that condition of approval, or because it's continued to go back and forth, it still applies for this site?
So the new samples will need to be collected under that rule, since all those samples that we are discussing in this entire email are null, since they aren't the true extent of excavation. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And has it been I don't want to say continual, but has it been a practice for staff to waive COAs in working with KPK to try and make sure that these sites do progress with remediation and reclamation?
Yeah, it's on a project specific. I've definitely waived 48 and 72-hour notices in order to keep equipment moving. I've waived this. I'm trying to think, there was one more, or I guess there were a few where boring logs were unable to be found, and we let that go since the work had been done prior to the approval of the work plan. So.
And is it typical for that to happen with other operators as well?
No.
And I apologize, I don't have it in my notes on this. This is one of the sites that you talked about last week during testimony, correct?
Correct.
In, I believe under my notes, it says there were visual impacts and additional excavation is needed, but can you remind us of approximately how long this site has been open?
Oh, it is on my slide. Over a year. I remember walking out there. I believe it was in 2020, fall of 2020 is when that happened.
Okay. So before the CPA was agreed to?
Yes.
Consistent with the other grub sites, correct?
Yep.
Okay. And I just want to quickly touch on some of the actual NOIV sites as opposed to some of the grip locations. The Grant Take battery is one of the sites that was an NOIV site, correct?
Correct.
And so for that one, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a site where the backfill is occurring,
Correct.
but there is still some impacts and remediation that needs to be done, correct? Can you just go over that in a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah, so this excavation had been open a significant length of time. It's adjacent to a major road. It's within a school zone on that road. So we've actually had complaints where people have complained about the site status because their kids walk by it. So it was one of our highest priorities to get this site backfilled. You can conduct in situ remediation, and that was proposed. The work plan that they gave us was missing a lot of documentation required to approve that work plan. But we went ahead and said, you know, in order to be protective of public health and safety at this location, getting that hole backfilled is our highest priority. So we went ahead and allowed backfill in October, and it was begun sometime in late November.
And this is the one where the backfill should be complete by the first quarter of this year, correct?
Yeah, there was about a foot left when I was there last,
And that was, I think, the Monday before the hearing.
a week ago today. Yep.
Okay. And so the backfill is near completion, but there's still in situ remediation that needs to be done.
Yep.
Would that be done via hydrovac, or what would be done to do that?
They proposed air sparge, SVE, and I believe also discussed injections. It was fairly vague in the last in the submittal that we approved backfill on. We requested a lot more robust of a pilot test to be proposed.
So backfill has been approved, but the
Mhm.
actual remediation has not yet been approved.
Yeah, it's gonna take several years to remediate the site in situ.
And I believe there was testimony from Mr. Duranlo last week. I believe he said in his experience, both as a contractor and with the COGCC, if there's not really environmental impacts ongoing, groundwater, soil impacted, that it could be cleaned up in a couple of weeks, but it would take a few months to clean up if there was those sort of impacts. Do you remember that testimony?
Yeah, so I think what he was trying to get at is if you have a straightforward release, you're digging it out, you're not encountering groundwater, you can ex situ get clean walls and sidewall samples and be done in a couple weeks. If you see groundwater, if you run into groundwater, it usually takes a little longer to excavate. Safety reasons, you also the landfills do not like really wet soils coming in, so you want to excavate judiciously, mix if you need to, and then you have to install groundwater monitoring wells and potentially groundwater remediation systems. As soon as impacts are in contact with groundwater, there's 4 quarters required. So that takes a year no matter what, even if it comes back non-detect from the very beginning. If there are impacts, it's 4 quarters of static. So at Grant, we're going to have an in situ remedial system going, similar to Walden water flood. They showed a picture of that in KPK's testimony. They'll have that system. It's stick up monitoring wells and pipes going across the location to a central blower. Once that is done doing its job, once we get those soils clean and back, then they will turn it off and they will monitor it for 4 more quarters. Once we've seen static 4 quarters clean, we can no further action this. So Grant is a good 2 years out, if best case scenario.
Okay, and you said this is one of the ones that's been going on longer, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and okay, no, I'll get back to that. And so I believe the soil spread field was another one of the NOAV. And just quickly, this one's been talked about quite a bit from here. It has been cleaned up. There's some dispute about whether reclamation is complete or not. Is that true?
That is true.
Are there any additional impacts that you're aware of at the soil spread field?
They, the operator and the primary contractor need to determine background levels. So there is, I believe, arsenic and selenium in situ still that exceed table 915-1. The last form we received for this project was returned to draft. The proposal had been to eliminate the pathway to groundwater by groundwater monitoring, which would have worked for selenium, but arsenic was above residential screening levels. I worked closely with our staff and we did a background determination and we're able to determine that these are consistent with background. So the primary contractor and the operator both just need to sit down and put some thought into a background determination, and we should be able to get this into the reclamation plan status.
Okay, and so it's closer in terms of the cleanup. It's just a matter of trying to make sure that, again, they submit the proper information consistent with the plans they've adopted and their BMPs, and then actually do the reclamation. Okay.
Yep.
And this is one where there was some debate back and forth about the type of vegetation and whether it's the appropriate vegetation.
That's correct.
Okay. And then I believe the UPRR, and I know there's several UPRR sites, but that's one of the NOAV sites, correct?
I believe the NOAV site is the UPRR 43 Pan Am G consolidation number 2. There are 10 UPRR sites.
Okay, so focusing specifically on again, the NOAV site as opposed to the GRIP locations.
Mhm. Okay.
So, and I just want to make sure that I have it correct in my notes here. There's been continual fencing issues at the UPRR site, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you briefly describe what those fencing issues are?
Yeah, so the orange construction fence you see in a lot of our photos, it is standard use for short-term projects. In the wind over long term, it'll stretch and start to fall unless it's replaced. And so on a lot of these sites where we're seeing this orange construction fencing, it's old. These sites have been open, some of them over 1,000 days. I believe the Uber that we are discussing right now, it's been open over 800 days. These sites, the fencing should be chosen to match the site specific. And so when you install orange construction fencing, you're expecting to be out in a couple months tops. So the fence itself has been windblown and is starting to fall. It's broken in a few places. It's been wired back together, but again, the next wind event's going to knock it right down. Considering how close it is to a home and a grandfather, I think I'd like to see a lot more robust fencing at this location.
Okay. And then the other notes that I have here, there were groundwater and soil impacts at this location.
Correct.
Have those been cleaned up yet?
Not as of, so the last form we got for this first iteration of it came in. It didn't have all the sample locations on the map, so we weren't able to evaluate really what was going on. It didn't have the most recent, I think it stopped at like SW17 and it went up to SW28. So we were missing a lot of data there. It was resubmitted last week while we were in this hearing, I believe. I took a quick glance at it at that point. One of our staff did actually, and then reached out to me, and it was missing the data table. So I'm unsure if it has been resubmitted for a third time. So I really don't know what's going on out there right now.
Okay. And my notes also have still looking for a detailed implementation schedule. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yes.
Is that part of what's been submitted and kind of sent back to them and waiting for, or is that separate from what's been submitted?
I think that's separate from what's been submitted.
So we still don't have a schedule of when the remediation is going to happen here.
Other than that, one that I showed in the slides that came in with the grip, which isn't very detailed, but it's better than anything we've gotten to date. There were some missed timelines in there and no extension request was officially made on those. So that's really all we got.
And the NESU site, is that one of the NOAV sites?
Yes, it is. There were two NESUs. I believe one got no further action. So the NOAV NESU is the NESU consolidation.
Okay. And for that, there's still no analytical data, only proposed testing.
There's some analytical data, yes.
There is some now, okay.
Yeah, there was some originally. It's just that it showed inorganic exceedances.
Okay.
So we're waiting for more.
And so the other notes I have in here is there's still been no excavation since the CPA, and so the extent of the impacts are still unknown. Is there a plan for this one, or is it like the UPRR where there's not an implementation plan yet?
We have received notice that they intend to do additional excavation, I believe this week. But I think we have an in-process form. I'm unsure without taking a tight look right now.
And the excavations needed in order to create the remediation plan?
No, so this one should be this should be kind of that first example I gave you of a very simple dig and haul and get out.
Okay, and how long has that site been open?
Over 900 days. I believe it was summer of 2020.
So 2.5 years, even though it should be a simple dig.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think those were the ones that I just wanted to try and make sure that I got clarity on. Again, trying to focus on the non-GRIP sites here, and the specific NOAV sites. And I think one thing that I wanted to try and understand there were some questions during the cross-examination about the different treatment of KPK versus the others.
Mhm.
But going back to what I asked at the beginning, there was some of the, like the waiving of the COAs, that different treatment kind of goes both ways, correct? You're working with them to try and get things moving forward.
Yes, correct. We don't have any other operator that gets to pick a priority list in order to get stuff approved. So they're constantly bumping stuff to the top of our list, and we're doing it so that they can keep moving. Yeah, it goes both ways. And you know, that you got to build up a trust, and you got to submit a clean approvable document, and you won't get any COAs.
And I think as a conclusory question, kind of in your opinion as a regional supervisor that works with this kind of stuff on a regular basis, especially in the northeast part of the state where there is a lot more oil and gas development, would you consider the progress made, and setting aside the GRIP sites, but the progress made on the NOAV specific sites, would you consider that there's been substantial progress made on those sites?
I think the grant, since we're backfilling, I don't love how we wound up backfilling. It's gray, but no, I don't think there's substantial progress, especially the Natsu. The Natsu's cut and dry. It's no, that should have been opened and closed up in less than a month.
Okay. I think that's the only questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. One quick follow-up question, and then I'm going to let other commissioners ask questions. Back on the fencing piece and the orange fencing, and it needs to be only for, temporary or, short-term things. Was there discussion with KPK about that fact? Because, I'm looking at most of these NOAV sites are not what I would call short-term. They're in the 500 to 1,000 day periods.
Yeah, there's been extensive conversation about this since the beginning. We've sent guidance documents over, we've had site-specific meetings, we've had PowerPoint presentations, phone calls. I mean, everything we can kind of do to try to get that point across.
Okay, great. Recognizing the next commissioner that desires to have discussion or questions. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Graber, for your testimony. Could you remind me how staff is communicating with KPK on progress and prioritization of projects? Do you all have regular meetings? And are you using the same documents and paperwork to show and track progress?
So we don't have a scheduled regular meeting, but we have regular meetings. Actually, when I called Mr. Meese this weekend, I looked at my phone, and my, how your phone puts together the top contacts. Two of my top contacts, one was Mark Holm and one was Mr. Meese at KPK. So we're talking several times a week. They're talking to the rest of my team several times a week. We've had every form of communication I can think of having professionally. We've had phone calls, we've had texts, we've had meetings with PowerPoints where the slides are given at the end of the week. We don't use the same tracking system for submittals. We have exchanged our tracking systems for submittals, and staff is always willing and has offered multiple times to review theirs. And then we are using that prioritization sheet that I believe was included in the exhibits. I sent that out after the June hearing. Myself and Ms. Brown sat down and tried to come up with a clean empirical way to rank the priority of these sites so that we could give KPK the ability to say, this is our highest priority, or, hey, this is a really high priority, but if we install better fencing here, it goes lower on the priority. So we can kind of ice that project while we work on this project. That was given to them sometime in July. Extended the deadline date, several conversations to August 4th, and then kind of didn't get anything else from them. It was finished January 10th, finally. So it is in process now. At least we have all the data in there and we can look at it holistically.
Oh, okay. So At one point during testimony, there was an email where Mr. Takis was trying to get into what I think is the prioritization document.
Yes.
And
That's
is
just the
that a
weekly
shared
email.
document that everyone is supposed to be using together, or is that just COGCC's, but Marcom and KPK have access to it?
So there's a prioritization email that goes out every week. That's the form prioritization. And then there's that second document. It's a shared Google document that is the ranking system that I was just talking about. I'm unsure of which one was up at that point. The email that requests form priorities is static. It comes from KPK. Staff responds to it and says, we'll endeavor to prioritize these. And then the project ranking system was created by COGCC staff. Marcom has full edit rights and is inputting the data. We are working with them, or we're working with them until the start of this hearing, trying to get that in.
Okay, thanks. If, in your opinion, if progress were to continue at the pace that it is progressing, would we be able to close out, let's start with the NOAV projects, by the end of the 5-year timeframe?
Grant, no. NESU, we should, with the rate we're going, no, but if they put effort forth on it, yes. Soil spread field, yes, we could be able to close out. UPRR, we don't have good data there for me to be able to answer. We're not going to know what the residual impacts are to groundwater until that site is backfilled and source zone wells are installed. If we backfill and we find source zone and it's screaming hot, it could be 10 years, but it'll at least be in the groundwater monitoring phase and that landowner will get his land use back.
Sorry, which site is that? Sorry.
That's the UPR 43, UPRR. Sorry, I should quit calling it the UPR. I apologize.
So of the sites that you're saying, no, probably won't be done, is that because there's going to have to be some continual monitoring for quite some time before they can close it out?
The grant is going to need continued remediation. So that system is going to be installed. It needs to work. It's quicker to ex situ, but getting it closed back up was a public safety issue. So that did extend our time frame at the grant, where we do have impacts in situ.
Okay, sorry. I think yes, thank you. I think
Okay.
what I'm trying to understand is, of these sites, when we say they won't be closed in 5 years, regardless of maybe who the operator would have been, are these the kind of sites that won't be closed in 5 years because of the contamination and the type of remediation that will be needed to get them to closure? Or are there other issues happening here?
I think it's a mix of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to expand? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Similarly, same line of questioning. What do we see for the grip locations?
If you recall, we had the pie charts that showed where we have significant unknowns. So those are very concerning, not knowing what's going on there. The Coslet A9 has had free product observed since December of 2020. That's adjacent to a wetland. We have free product within, or actually don't know. I know the wells are hot. I don't know if there's free product in them. Same thing with the facility 4 North. There's free product in the down gradient monitoring well. Those sites need heavy, quick remediation. Leaving those impacts in situ just creates a bigger plume, and that bigger plume can threaten sensitive receptors nearby. So I don't see the progress that would lead us to closure at this point on many of these sites.
Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you, Ms. Graber, for your testimony, for your expertise, and for the work that you do on behalf of the people of the state of Colorado. I have just a couple of questions for you. I realize that it's been through the weekend since you gave your initial testimony, but I'm going to refer to a couple of statements that you made. on Friday. If you have any concerns with the statements as I state them, please let me know. But I have some questions associated with those statements. One of those statements was that a number of projects are still open with this operator. You've reaffirmed that here today. Can you summarize, in your opinion, generally why those projects remain open? Are they, to explain further, are those projects open because they're waiting on actions by staff? Or are those projects open because they're waiting on actions by the operator? Or are there other obstacles that are preventing further action on those projects at this time?
I believe there are a small handful that have backfill requests in process, recently prioritized, just recently. I would say that's probably less than 5, but that's just shooting from the hip. I don't know that off, absolutely without checking my notes. The rest are waiting on action from the operator.
Thank you, Ms. Graber. I appreciate that. My final question would be that you made a statement when you were talking about the CPA, and again, feel free to clarify if you don't recall this statement, but that you hoped the CPA would work out and not be adversarial. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay, and can you elaborate that on that a little further? Do you believe that the CPA is working out, and do you believe that the approach at this point is not adversarial in nature towards compliance?
Yeah, it's adversarial. It's we staff have invested a massive amount of time and energy, practically full time for 3 people. We've tried to impart our knowledge, tried to help through projects, and oftentimes it comes back with backlash. Tried to help through different background determinations, because background determination isn't one size fits all. It's everything's unique. Sitting down and trying to help with that has turned into we're moving the goalposts, and that's probably the cleanest example I have. The other thing is I can't, with good conscience, ask my team to have a conversation with the primary contractor or with the operator for fear that they're going to be misquoted in the future. We have had to make it so that anytime we have a conversation, we have 2 people on so that nobody gets exposed to that kind of risk. And that's hard. I mean, I really truly try to have a friendly, congenial attitude with all operators. If an operator wants me to go on site and talk through a project with them, I will. I won't do it on every single one of their projects because they should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. But if they come into a situation where they need help, I'm there. And that's hard now, because now if I want to be there to help them, I have to interrupt somebody else's work, bring them out, sit down, and so that I'm not exposed to that too. And that's been very disheartening.
Thank you. Appreciate your candid nature of that response. And the first part of that question was, do you believe that the CPA is effective in its intent at this point?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Further questions for this witness? Scraper, just a couple of follow-up. I went back and looked at your testimony relative to the days of projects that are open, and the days are 513, 1400, or 909, depending upon what you're counting it for. 863, 858, 898, and 1548. If I got those numbers right. Got it, went back through my notes. Typical, atypical, where does this fall in the line of you've been working with the COGCC on these sorts of cleanups, et cetera. Where does this fall on the line?
Atypical. Do you want me to expand?
Yes, please.
So we'll see groundwater remediations where they stay open longer. You could go into the database and find some very old remediations. Some of those are like within gas plants where they're not able to actively dig, so they're doing their asparage SVE. They've got good perimeter controls. There's not a sensitive receptor nearby. But to have excavations open for this amount of time is almost unheard of. So typically we see, like, I believe Mr. Duranlo was saying that, you know, that source removal is aggressively removed. They get in, they dig it out, they backfill it, or they get clean samples, they backfill it. Okay, now we're in the groundwater monitoring phase. That might take a little longer, but to have projects open with an excavation open that long is a liability that most operators aren't willing to take. And it's not something that's protective of public safety.
So in listening to the evidence and testimony over 2 days, one thing one thing that's sort of percolating through my head, I've not made any of these decisions, of course, is that it seems like the compliance plan agreement in section 4, at least from some perspectives, did a poor job of establishing like timelines for completion. But then I went back and you know, that's some of the testimony from that's some of the testimony from sort of all sides. And so I'm just a little confused because I went back and I looked at the section 4 and the NOAVs in particular, and like soil spread field paragraph 5A(2), KPK will implement such plan in accordance with the implementation schedule approved by COGCC staff. Now, to me, that tells me that there are timeframes within which things should happen.
Mhm.
But I don't know that I got a lot of testimony about that. There was a lot of sort of here and there. And, you know, NESU had the same thing, remediation in accordance with, you know, to obtain staff approval to complete remediation in accordance with the rules of this plan, et cetera. So it seems like each one of the NOAVs, when we did the CPA, we didn't put specific timeframes because there needed to be further work to then create timeframes for implementation. Were timeframes created, and have those timeframes been met?
So yes and no. So for example, let's just take the NESU to start. The NESU staff just recently found out that organic impacts are still in situ. In order to create a time frame, you need to know what the contamination is. So any time frame that is put into a Form 27 at that point is based on the information that's taken at that point. So the NESU remediation timeline, which I'd have to look at the form, but I believe that the time frame that they said it would be done has passed without it being done. And they should, if you want to request an extension to an approved timeline, per rule, you have to submit a Form 27 requesting that extension 2 weeks prior. And so that isn't happening on these projects. So the Form 27s do have an implementation schedule built within them. And then if you miss that implementation schedule, or you know you're going to miss that implementation schedule, you need to submit an extension request. We're not seeing that.
Just for the NESU, or are there others in which extension requests were not filed?
Grant, we still haven't had the detailed standalone implementation schedule that was requested by the CPA. So we really can't hold anything against that. We also don't know what the remedial technology is going to be officially, since the plan for a pilot test was inadequate. We couldn't approve it. The UPRR, I believe there are impacts underneath the road, but that's just from a cursory review. We recently got that form and went back and forth trying to get all the data in so we know what's going on. But I believe that's what's happening there. So again, we don't know what's going on, so we can't build a true timeline. The Form 27 should say the anticipated date of completion of site investigation. And a lot of times those are missed. So I mean, any completion date that is in the past has been missed because many of these don't have, except for the soil spread field, don't have a complete investigation.
So to follow up then, like on the grant where you don't know the remedial technology, the UPRR, maybe impacts under the road, you don't know what's happening. If there's this don't know category, is that substantial compliance with the CPA and section 4?
No.
And why not?
Because CPA in section 4, the spirit of it was to clean up and remediate and close these sites and get the land use back and remove the threat. If we don't know what the threat is, how can we remove it, mitigate it? Or if appropriate, monitor it so it naturally attenuates. If we don't know, we can't protect public health and safety.
And this is probably a better question for Mr. Talkus, and we still have a rebuttal to come. But do you know why you don't know?
Because it hasn't been reported to us. I mean, there's been a lot of activity and a lot of sampling, but very little sit down, figure it out, move forward. There's been a lot of let's geoprobe, let's take samples, but there's been very little sit down, make a path, propose it to the staff in a cohesive manner that can actually be understood and approved and move forward.
That segues to my next and possibly last question. As an attorney, I never say this is my last question because I don't have another one. You testified earlier that, and I think you testified on direct and then under Commissioner Cross or Commissioner questions, that in this instance, you're dealing with an operator in which there is a, or for lack of a better word, lack of trust, because you do not allow your staff to singularly meet with the operator. You require them to have, two people at least, so that the conversation or the discussion is not, or is understood by two COGC staffers, and is, not susceptible to be misconstrued or misconveyed later. Similar to the question about the number of days and whether that's typical or not of excavation being open, is that approach that you're taking with regard to sort of ensuring yourselves with regard to conversations, is that typical? Is that atypical? Do you do that with other operators? Could you comment?
I shouldn't speak in the extremes, but I have never had to do that with another operator, and I can confidently say that. I have had complex sites where I need other staff members on to help me walk through things with operators, but I've never had to do one to protect us from misconstruing in this statement.
And how long have you been employed by the commission in the capacity in which you would be having these conversations with operators?
So I started in I guess 4.5 years is how long I've been here.
And so for 4.5 years, it's your testimony that you've never had, that you're never, that you're not aware that COGCC has had to have that sort of insurance policy.
My testimony is I have not had to do that.
Okay.
I cannot
Okay.
speak
That's
for other
fair.
people. Yeah.
So 4.5 years. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none, Ms. Stafford, as is the normal course, we generally provide the direct examiner with an opportunity for redirect after commissioner questions.
Thank you, Chair. I have no redirect.
Okay. At this point, we are done with Ms. Graber. Thank you very much for being with us throughout last week and this week. We really appreciate it and appreciate the work you do. So next we're going to move to KPK rebuttal. First, oh, go ahead.
Staff is not ready to close our case in chief just yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was under the misimpression that that was your last witness.
I
Please.
apologize. With the benefit of the weekend, we had an opportunity to consider some of our may call witnesses, and staff would like to call Director Murphy.
Okay, then let's move forward.
And just to be clear, Director Murphy was listed on staff's pre-hearing statement as a may call witness, just in case there is any concern with that, and I believe she needs to be sworn in.
Okay, while we're getting the swearing in done, Ms. Larson, could I ask you to provide the parties with time checks?
Yes, so KPK has 47 minutes and 9 seconds remaining, and staff has 18 minutes and 45 seconds remaining.
Okay, great. AAG Davenport, the swearing in of the witness.
Thank you, Chair. Director Murphy, would you please raise your right hand? State your name and say that you swear to tell the truth.
My name is Julie Murphy and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Stafford, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Director Murphy, could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Thank you. My name is Julie Murphy. I'm the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
Could you please briefly just explain your background, beginning with your time as director?
So I'm currently the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I'm a lawyer by training. I started working with the commission as a lawyer and then came over and managed the hearings and enforcement teams. And then I've kind of had a couple of different roles in the interim, including being the director, being the assistant director for energy and minerals, working on policy issues for the Department of Natural Resources. And when the professional commission was seated in 2020, I became the director of the commission at that point in time. So I've had this position for about 2.5 years.
Thank you. Now, through your various roles, would you say you've developed a comprehensive understanding of oil and gas operations in this state?
I believe so at a high level. Obviously, I rely heavily on staff for detailed technical issues.
Now, turning to KPK, based on your understanding of this matter, has KPK shown an ability to comply with the CPA and the rules?
Over the since implementation of the CPA, I do not believe so.
And can you walk us through that a little bit? What have you based your opinion on?
So I've worked with staff, again, at a high level, being briefed on what progress is being made. I've been made aware of their requests for no further action, and really focused on the closure work that's we expected to be done as a result of the CPA. Again, I think that we've had 3 out of 58 remediation projects closed. And that's not what I expected when the compliance agreement was put into effect.
And now you're familiar with staff's requested relief to levy outstanding penalties in this matter and to consider revoking certificates of clearance and refuse to issue GDPs?
I am.
And what is your opinion on the suitability of staff's requested relief here?
These are serious consequences, and they are not requested lightly. When staff came to the commission in September of now 2021 with the enforcement action that gave rise to the CPA, I believe I relayed to the commissioners that staff believed it was out of tools to bring this operator into compliance. And the commissioners directed staff and KPK to develop a compliance agreement to try to reset, to try to start over, to try to demonstrate that we can get this operator back into compliance. And in my opinion, that is the best place to be. Operators need to be responsible for their own work in the state. That's how we are staffed. That's how we are organized. And so we came into it, leaning into the project and wanting to move projects along to, again, get past not just identifying what the plans are, but get to implementation of said plans to protect the environment, to remediate. And so we are now left in a continuing to be left in this difficult position where there's talk of compliance, but we're not seeing the progress that we need. And again, feel like we continue to be out of tools. We explored the compliance agreement and haven't achieved the success that we had hoped. And so that's why staff continues its request for these complicated, challenging, and consequential remedial actions.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Looking for the mute button. Mr. Jacobs, Cross.
If we could take a few minutes, we weren't expecting this witness. Maybe take a short bathroom break, 10 minutes.
Sure. Do you want to go say 10:24?
That sounds great.
Waiting for the full return of commissioners. Give us just a sec. All right, there we are. Okay, I believe Mr. Jacobs, your floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Director Murphy. Thanks for being here. I just have a question or two. you acknowledge that we're just 14 months into the effectiveness of the CPA, correct?
I do.
And the GRIP implementation plan wasn't even submitted till February 1 of last year, or rather January 31 of last year. It'd be a year ago tomorrow.
Yes,
And are you really prepared to terminate the CPA agreement?
yes,
You heard the testimony of Richard Price, did you not, that these large portfolios of remediation take time to get started and build momentum?
I heard pieces of it, but not all of it.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Any redirect, Ms. Stafford?
All right, lost my mute button there. No redirect. Thank you.
Okay. Following normal course of procedure, Director Murphy, you're now subject to questions from commissioners. Are there questions from commissioners? All right, seeing no questions, you are excused. Thank you for being with us. Ms. Stafford, you're recognized for your case in chief.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. That should conclude staff's case in chief, and I would re-elevate my request regarding our exhibits. I think that we discussed could potentially be considered at the closure of our case again.
Okay, and I have tasked AAG Davenport with helping me, which is appropriate given that he's the lawyer and I'm just a commissioner. AAG Davenport, if you could provide some perspective to commission so we can determine what to do with this exhibit issue.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So if everyone would indulge me, I'm going to go through my understanding of the pre-hearing situation so that we're all clear on what happened before the hearing began. My understanding of the pre-hearing procedure is both pursuant to the hearing officer's order, both KPK and staff submitted pre-hearing statements with exhibits listed. And then subsequent to that, both KPK and staff submitted responses to pre-hearing statements wherein they listed their objections to the opposing parties' exhibits. Staff did not object to any of the exhibits KPK listed. And pursuant to our conversation at hearing, all of KPK's exhibits listed in its pre-hearing statement are deemed admitted. Same situation with regard to staff's exhibits, but a little bit different because KPK did object to approximately 110 exhibits of staff. But the exhibits not listed in KPK's objection list are admitted. So where we stand in my understanding is effectively that for all of the exhibits KPK listed in its pre-hearing statement, those are admitted. For all of the unobjected to exhibits that staff listed in their pre-hearing statement, those are admitted. And then in the course of the hearing, staff has brought forward some exhibits from that list upon which KPK objected, and some of those exhibits have been admitted. However, that is certainly not the entirety of that 110 exhibit list. And so, as I understand AAG Stafford's request now, she would like to have the remaining exhibits to which KPK objected admitted, so that the commission may review and consider them as part of your consideration of this case.
Let me stop you there, AAG Davenport. Ms. Stafford, is that an accurate summary of the staff's position in terms of where you're at with regard to the exhibits that are not admitted so far, but that were listed on your exhibit list?
That is an accurate representation.
Okay. AAG Davenport, then move forward and provide us with perspective on next steps for commission.
I will. I'd note that I don't see a furrowed brow or a shaking of head from Mr. Jacobs, so I'd like to make sure that my summary is accurate from your perspective as well, sir, if that's all right, Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Jacobs, do you have a furrowed brow or other thoughts about the articulation from AAG Davenport?
I'm afraid my furrowed brow is partly hereditary. My dad's forehead looks the same, but
Yeah, me as well, Mr. Jacobs. So I
Yeah.
didn't mean anything negative by it.
no worries. I believe that's an accurate recitation of where we are with respect to the admissibility or admission of exhibits.
Thank you. I appreciate that we're all on the same page now. Commissioners, as I am reviewing, so you do have a request from staff to admit all of the exhibits to which KPK has objected to. As I go through that list, and I have it in front of me, commissioners, it was filed on, I believe, January 17th of this year. It's as attachment 2 to KPK's response to staff's pre-hearing statement. And within that, there is, starting on, I think, page 4 or 5 of that PDF, a list of exhibits, staff exhibits to which KPK objects. As I go through it, I think the majority of the objections from KPK are relevant. There are a few foundation and hearsay objections as well, but the vast majority are relevant. And I think we can break these into categories because I see many, though I have not looked at every single one of these exhibits recently, but they are all described similarly in KPK's list. For example, on the bottom of the first page, going on to the second of KPK's table, all lists disposal manifests. So if the commission wants to go through this list, and maybe we can break it into sections and hear from the parties, perhaps it makes sense to see, after going through this hearing, give the parties another chance to see if we really need to go through this list on an exhibit by exhibit discussion. But my suggestion is seeing if the parties are able to cut this list down for us at all. And if they are not, then trying to break this up into categories so that we are not going through exhibit by exhibit for 100 and something odd exhibits.
So with that, what are you suggesting as the next step for commission?
To see if we can maybe give the parties a few minutes to see if they can cut down this list at all, so there's less to go through from the commission.
Well, I'm all in favor of that approach. So do we want to break for 10 minutes and see if Stafford and Mr. Jacobs can huddle and see if there's any ability to sort of break the list down a bit? Commissioners, are you comfortable with that? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm okay with that if that's the way that this commission determines to go. I will note that the commission historically, even through this process, has exercised its right to utilize the relaxed rules of evidence. And at least in my recollection, which I'm certain may not be 100% accurate, but I don't recall at this point us not allowing evidence in previous to this. And so I guess I'm wondering why the consternation on these particular pieces, and whether or not understanding that we have the ability to have the relaxed rules of evidence, just allow them into evidence.
No, I think that's a fair and valid recitation of how we've treated these sorts of hearings previously. And so as staff and KPK and Mr. Jacobs have an opportunity to sort of huddle about this, they should take that into account, I think. AG Davenport, you've been around longer than both Commissioner Messner and I. Would you agree with regard to that enunciation of relaxed standard by Commissioner Messner?
Yeah, I agree with that. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner Messner. the APA and the commission's rules both provide for where it is, and I'm going to summarize this in layman's terms, helpful for the commission to get to the truth. It may relax, it may admit items that wouldn't necessarily be admissible under the strict application of the Colorado Rules of Evidence. My suggestion was to, in an attempt to hopefully cut down on the number of objected to exhibits that we still had, so that we could keep track of that, and then the commission could, make a decision, and potentially make a decision in sort of large swaths of exhibits based on that standard of evidence.
So I
Mr.
think I'm going
Chairman-
to, go ahead, Mr. Jacobs.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do appreciate the references made, the comments of yourself and Mr. Commissioner Messner. But I would just point out for the record that this commission is being asked to consider the most severe sanctions available to it. That wholesale admission of 110 exhibits timely objected to under the Colorado Rules of Evidence does not comport with the due process requirements of an evidentiary hearing in which such sanctions could be imposed. And I'm more than happy to work with Ms. Stafford for however long you deem appropriate to try and truncate this process and reach agreement, if possible, on the admissibility of those remaining 110 exhibits, as Mr. Davenport suggests. Thank you.
Let's give it a sophomoric try. Let's give you guys 10 minutes to 10:47. Let's return at 10:47 and see where we're at on this issue. And then we'll proceed after that.
May I ask for just an additional 5 minutes? I can send a Teams invite, Caitlin, to you and your team, and we can get on a different platform virtual meeting to discuss this, if that would be appropriate.
Thank you. That
Stafford?
would be appropriate. May I just make one concluding point before we break here?
Go ahead.
All but 3 of these exhibits that KPK has lodged objections to are commission documents. They are in COGCC. I am frankly confused by a lot of these objections, and for the remaining, I guess, 3 by my list outstanding objections related to exhibit 1005, 1006, and 1008. This is a commission staff document kept in the regular course of business. And so I guess I question the utility of this continued attempt to get us to work out our differences here, because frankly, I don't understand KPK's objections.
Well, perhaps the 15 minutes that we provide both parties will give you and Mr. Jacobs an opportunity to further understand and explain the objections and understand on your part. You're not committing to anything. It just gives, I'm just trying to create a record to give everyone the opportunity to be heard. So let's do that. If you guys could abide me by joining and having a little Teams meeting, that'll give me a chance to huddle with my AAG one more time as well. So let's return at 10:55.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back on the record. We instructed the parties to have a slight discussion among themselves offline about the exhibits and the motion to exclude. Ms. Stafford, did that occur, and can you provide me your perspective of the results of that meeting? And then I'll ask the same of Mr. Jacobs.
Certainly, Chair Robbins, and can you all hear me? I had some issues with the Teams meeting, so. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. So we were able to confer over Teams, and it's staff's understanding that the agreement that was reached, or I should back up at least. So KPK sees, it's our understanding that KPK sees these exhibits as existing in two categories, pre-CPA and post-CPA documents. Based on the discussion we just had with respect to the list of remaining exhibits that KPK still has objections lodged on. It was represented to us that KPK will stand firm on the admittance of the documentation preceding the effective date on the CPA as it relates to relevance. I'd note that Colorado Rule of Evidence, Rule 401, relevant evidence means evidence having any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more or less probable than it would be without the evidence. So they will stand firm on those particular objections lodged, but it appears that KPK will, I think, is willing to allow the post-CPA, the documents that post-date the CPA, those particular exhibits to be admitted.
Okay, and then just let me ask a follow-up question. And then with that change, is staff still seeking to admit the pre-CPA documents?
Staff would still appreciate if they were admitted. If that is not, if that is not where the commission is going here, I would at least ask that pursuant to Rule 517C, you take administrative notice of those particular documents.
And just for the non-lawyers in the room, if we take administrative notice of those documents, they're admitted, right? Is that what you're asking?
I am a little unclear on that. My understanding was that at least you could review them if you needed to.
Okay, I'm going to categorize that as admitted. Not
Okay.
saying that's where we're going to go, but just so that we're understanding of what's happening here. Okay, Mr. Jacobs, would love to hear from you.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm a little disappointed that at that last end run on our objections via administrative notice, we've objected to the pre-CPA documents, one of the two buckets that Ms. Stafford did describe and that we discussed offline as not relevant to this CPA substantial compliance hearing. And we stand firm on that objection. They are not necessary to the consideration of your of the remaining evidence and the testimony in this proceeding regarding substantial compliance today of KPK under the CPA. The other category, large category of documents that comprise the vast majority of the 110 exhibits that remain the subject of timely and valid objections to admission by KPK concern COGCC documents that have not been authenticated by a witness, that some of which contain information submitted by KPK, other versions of which or iterations of which in COGCC contain site condition information or inspectors' notes. The fact that they are in COGCC is really of no consequence. Their relevance to this proceeding, and their reliability has not been tested, and we're not going document by document to do that. And just as you have decided previously not to consider unadjudicated NOABs alleging violations, we believe that these COGCC documents should be excluded, but if they are admitted, that they only be given the weight concerning descriptions of site conditions. They would not be evidence of violations or testimony concerning any asserted violations in this proceeding. So that's our position. I had understood that we might agree on keeping out the pre-CPA documents in favor of this compromise on the COGIS documents post-CPA. But I guess I was mistaken in that understanding.
Okay, commissioners, having heard from the parties on the exhibit issues, let me provide my perspective and see what folks are thinking. I believe that there is one document that is a complaint document that is objected to based upon hearsay. I do not recollect that the staff really spoke to it or otherwise addressed it. And if they did so little to it that it doesn't make it into my notes. I believe that that document should be excluded and not, part of the record. With regard to the documents that are objected to based upon relevance, I think that I would overrule that objection. We can understand the argument. We can make our own determination on relevancy and weight of the evidence. I think it's consistent with the past practice of the commission in our relaxed standards, and I think we can allow that in. I think that with the other documents that are COGIS, irrespective of whether it's relevance or foundation, I think that we can admit those documents and we have the ability to give the weight. I believe it's appropriate that in earlier objections and pronouncements from me as chair, I noted that those documents I think are important relative to site descriptions. And so the admission would be sort of narrow to that point. And we've been consistent that we're not looking at unadjudicated violations. So I would admit the COGIS documents. I think they're part of our business records, but I also would put some parameters around them that we would be looking at those relevant to site descriptions. I've talked about the complaint document. So I believe in AAG Davenport, oh good, you're here. What would you add to my thoughts about the motion, the exhibits?
What I think, given you're in your capacity as chair, first of all, your thoughts are rulings in terms of admissibility. Of course, if you'd like to check in with the other commissioners, that's your prerogative as well on their thoughts. I did have a question for my own record keeping purposes. Is there an easy way to figure out which are pre-CPA and which are post-CPA exhibits? Because it is my understanding from the discussion we just had that the only remaining objections from KPK are to the pre-CPA exhibits in this list of 110 exhibits. And Mr. Jacobs, please correct me if my understanding is wrong.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Thank you. No, that's correct. And I think the easiest way to determine that would be to annotate this list over the lunch break today and get that to Ms. Stafford and you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Davenport.
Okay, then why don't we do that? And then AAG Davenport, if you could take my thoughts, which are now rulings, which I'm utterly impressed with that, and like draft that up so that we've got something so the record is clear about what's admitted and what's not. And then we will address this after the lunch break and we'll sort of finalize it so that we've got something that we can read into the record in writing so that we've got a clear record of what's admitted and if so, in what capacity and what's not admitted. Mr. Jacobs,
sorry.
Go ahead. AAG Davenport, go ahead, please.
I apologize. I wanted to clarify something given that I'm going to be drafting something up over lunch. My understanding of your ruling is, your evidentiary ruling is that everything except for exhibit 1046, the complaint document, is admitted.
That is
Um,
accurate. And
okay.
that the admission of the documents that are COGIS documents, that they are admitted relative to the weight concerning the descriptions of site conditions.
Okay. I may need some help from the parties making sure I have the right exhibit numbers attached to those. So when you do your pre and post CPA annotations, designating those would be helpful as well for me and hopefully for the commission. Mr. Chair, my intent in figuring out which were pre and which were post were solely to keep a record of which exhibits you had admitted over the objection and which were essentially there no one was objecting to admissibility any longer.
Okay.
I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Jacobs, it was your objection. Are you clear in the path forward that we've tried to articulate? I'm not asking if you agree with it. I'm just, are you clear with it?
No, I'm not happy with your ruling, but I'm certainly appreciative of Mr. Davenport's care in identifying through our annotations of the list of objectionable exhibits, those which are admitted based on your ruling over KPK's timely objection. I
Okay.
think that's entirely appropriate.
Okay. Ms. Stafford, same question. You may not need to be happy with it, but are you clear with regard to the direction we're going with regard to the exhibits and the objections?
Yes, I am clear now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Next up is KPK rebuttal. That's with a question mark at the end. That's why I went high with the lilt.
That is correct. And that is
Are
my
you-
understanding.
Are you ready to proceed with KPK rebuttal, Mr. Jacobs?
I am, however, there is the issue of demonstrative slides that I indicated we would be using and had shared prior to the hearing with Ms. Stafford, and that she indicated her team members were reviewing while she was defending witnesses on cross and redirecting them.
That is true. Ms. Stafford, did your team and or you, given all the other things you've been working on this morning, have a chance to collect your thoughts with regard to the demonstrative exhibits that were presented recently?
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I think I will withdraw my standing objection and just make objections as appropriate.
Okay, very good. I think that's a good approach. And so did you have anything further, Mr. Jacobs?
I would simply note and remind the commissioners that the information on these slides is the same character as that contained on staff's 91-page demonstrative. Site status, pictures, and the like. I don't think have implementation schedules, but those were very old and objectionable as well from our perspective. So I'm happy to take those one at a time. However, that does feed into our rebuttal testimony time is the concern there. And that's why I tried to get this cleared up ahead of time.
Okay.
Are there particular slides to which you intend to object, Ms. Stafford? And if there's a common basis for objection, can't we try to resolve that now?
Well, it strikes me that I wasn't given the same opportunity during Ms. Graber's testimony. So I think from staff's perspective, we would just appreciate it if the presentation could continue.
So let's do this. Let's get started with the rebuttal. The clock's not on yet, but we'll turn it on in just a sec. And if we start to see common themes, Mr. Jacobs, we might be able to, make a common theme ruling. But at this point, the commissioners have not seen these demonstrative slides either. So I think it would be premature for us to make a uniform ruling on everything.
Understood.
Okay. Ms. Larson, the ever-present time check.
Yes, Mr. Chair, KPK has 46 minutes and 28 seconds remaining. Staff has 15 minutes and 15 seconds remaining.
Okay. Then we will get started with rebuttal. Mr. Jacobs, as a courtesy, did you want to have Ms. Larson alert you when you get to a certain amount of time for closing? Or not? Are you taking
Yes.
care of that yourself?
We're tracking it pretty carefully as well, but I'd like to reserve 11 minutes for closing.
Great. Okay, then, Mr. Jacobs, you have the floor. Your first witness.
Just a moment while we get him situated. Has Mr. Levi Kirk been elevated, Ms. Larson?
No, we're bringing him now.
Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs, I can't remember, was Mr. Kirk sworn in?
I
at the
don't
beginning?
believe so, or maybe he was, but I just don't recall. He was here on Wednesday.
In an abundance of caution, let's do the swearing in.
Thank you.
I don't have Mr. Kirk on my list, so we should swear him in.
Great.
I-
He was
I
listed.
note that he's unmuted. Mr. Kirk, could I have you? Thank you, sir. Mr. Kirk, would you raise your right hand, state your name, and say that you swear to tell the truth, please?
I, Levi Kirk, swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna start the clock here, Mr. Jacobs, go for it.
Welcome, Mr. Kirk. Please describe your education and employment, if you would.
Yeah, my name is Levi Kirk. I have a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University in Ecosystem Science and Sustainability. I've been a project manager at Marcom LLC. That's my current role. My current role at KPK is oversight of field work, form submission, and ensuring that work is being conducted in accordance with the CPA. I've worked for 6 years under COGCC regulations for multiple different operators, completed over 100 different remediation sites. I've worked for multiple clients in multiple states under federal, state, and local agencies.
Thank you. And did you assist KPK and its council in preparing a demonstrative of slides with photos, site status, and current implementation schedules for sites you will be testifying about in rebuttal to aid you in more efficiently providing that testimony?
Yes, I did, as did Mr. Takis, other Marcom staff, and Mr. Meese with KPK.
Let's bring up that demonstrative now, Mr. Killian. Mr. Kirk, can you give us a high-level overview of the global progress at KPK's CPA governed sites?
Yeah, I have overseen a tremendous amount of work at KPK sites. Hey, John, Mr. Jacobs, I'm actually having a problem on my end seeing the slides.
Okay. Could we pause the time, please, while we get that corrected? I do apologize.
Yeah, time pause.
Thank you. Is Ms. Rushovich able to come in and assist you?
I think she's on her way.
Yeah, okay, it'll be just a minute. She's around the corner from the witness room. Thank you for your patience.
We are all good. I apologize for that.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Just a moment before we start the clock, I would like to regain my place. okay. I believe you indicated that you've overseen an enormous amount of technical work, and we're just about,
Yeah, so
into
I've
the rest.
overseen
Yeah.
an enormous amount of technical work at CPA sites completed by Marcom. And I've also guided KWS on remedial excavation work. I also conducted both the waste management training and the spill response plan training for both Marcom personnel and KPK field crews. As you previously heard, KPK has received 3 NFAs. You also previously heard that 9 sites are also very close to NFA. Those 9 sites, these are sites where KPK has removed the source of contamination, backfilled the site and with clean soil, and graded the site to match pre-existing surface grade conditions. Aside from those sites, a majority of the remaining sites have had initial investigation, soil sampling, and have a plan in place in determining our next steps. So it's not that we haven't done anything at those sites. We've certainly done a lot of work. 23 CPA sites have concurrent soil remediation, excavation, and soil sampling ongoing, with anticipated completion by the end of this year. Longmont Farms, Boxer, Kiefer George, and Robert Burge are all examples of these sites near completion and only require additional sampling. Paul Hines, George Norden, and Premium Turkey Farms are also sites where an enormous amount of remedial excavation work has been completed. With that being said, we're looking at about 50% of the CPA governed sites to be on track to be completed within 2 years of the CPA.
And that would be by the end of this year, 2023?
Yes, by the end of 2023.
You've heard testimony, Mr. Kirk, that at least some of Marcom's work under the CPA has been delayed given the CPA's many hold points for KPK, such as waiting the required 48 or 72 hours when giving notice to conduct sampling or other actions, or waiting on review of staff's review and approval, or return to draft of forms. Can you describe the work Marcom and KPK do during these hold points?
Yeah, so there's not a day that goes by that Marcom or KPK field crews are not in the field implementing their CPA plans or making progress at both CPA and non-CPA sites. Examples of CPA sites include Paul Hines, Premium Turkey Farm, and Rocky Mountain Fuel Consolidation. Examples of non-CPA sites include Greeley National Bank, Gillison A2, and Rogers. As of earlier this month, Rogers achieved a no further action status, which, if you were present during the October hearings, was a big topic.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Kirk, can you give us your perspective of the CPA sites and any other sites that were the subject of staff testimony last Thursday, and some also this morning?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I don't have time to discuss all the site progress, but I'll do my best to discuss sites highlighted during staff's testimony. And I'm happy to answer any commissioner questions about sites that I'm covering today.
Ms. Graber previously testified about soil impacts and groundwater impacts at the Grant Tank Battery. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And can you describe the current status of that site and what remedial work has been performed?
Yes, so an initial remediation or remedial action plan was submitted early in September of last year, 2022. And a lot of back and forth occurred during that time period. And forms have been resubmitted, and conditional backfill was recently approved at the Grant Tank Battery on October 26th. And backfill began shortly after that. Today, backfill is about 70% complete. Ms. Graber testified that there are no compliant monitoring wells from Grant Tank Battery. That is not true. In fact, there is a point of compliance that has been established on the north side of the road, which is a monitoring well. Ms. Graber's demonstrative does not show the compliant monitoring well because it's cropped. Also, remaining impacts will be addressed utilizing the proposed in situ remediation techniques provided in the Form 27 that was recently submitted on January 24th, I believe, and is pending staff's approval.
Mr. Kirk, do you recall that Mr. Duranlo and Ms. Graber also testified about a muddy track pad at Grant Tank Battery with a photo dated January 10, 2023? Is that representative of its current status?
No, that is not representative.
How do you know that?
We actually had a Marcom crew that inspected the site last Friday, and things were in good condition.
Thank you. Ms. Graber also testified about impacts at James S. Haley. Can you please describe the current status of that site?
Yeah, by no means do I dispute Ms. Graber's testimony that there are some impacts remaining at the site. But Ms. Graber did not give the full story at that site. These additional impacts were discovered earlier this month. I was the one who discovered those as I was sampling. And in a span of just a few weeks, we have received approval on our proposed remediation plan to address these impacts with additional excavation under the flow line where the impacts remain in situ. Also, Ms. Graber misspoke when she suggested these impacts were visible to the eye in her photo demonstrative. That photo was taken before additional impacts were discovered, and no visible impacts are shown in that photo in their demonstrative.
And that photo is staff exhibit 1364R, photo dated January 13, 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, impacts were found or after that photo was taken.
And you were the one who discovered those impacts, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Duranlo also testified about forms that were returned to draft in part due to mapping for James S. Haley and other sites. How did KPK address these alleged mapping errors?
So staff's return to draft indicated that sampling points did not line up with coordinates and were inconsistent. To address staff's comments, Marcom revised the map utilizing both the coordinates and the field sampling map showing the location of the samples in reference to the excavation. And we did that to provide the most accurate depiction of sample locations. Coordinates were updated from the updated map and were provided to staff based on the revised map, and staff has accepted these revisions since then. I do want to note that even with variation in coordinates provided, the coordinates from the original sampling were collected within 1 to 2 meters of accuracy as required by COGCC.
So the prior testimony regarding excavation moving, do you agree with that characterization for James S. Haley?
I do agree that further excavation was conducted, but samples that were collected before that excavation was conducted did follow the 1 to 2 meters of accuracy guidance from COGCC.
Thank you. Mr. Kirk, can you please describe your understanding of the current status of the soil spread field NOAV site and what remedial work has been performed and remains to be performed?
So currently we are working to determine the background method to be utilized at this site. Once that is decided, we can determine if samples are below background levels. We have also proposed the installation of monitoring wells to verify that the pathway to groundwater is incomplete at the site.
Thank you. Mr. Kirk, you'll recall that Mr. Duranlo and Ms. Graber also testified about reclamation at this site and specifically plant health. Can you discuss the state of revegetation at soil spread field?
Yeah, so I was on site the day well, it was October 11th, 2022 with staff's reclamation specialist during the collection of the drone imagery shown in staff's demonstrative. And during our site visit, he said, which I agreed with, that the site had revegetated with white sweet clover, smooth brome, and other prairie riparian vegetation. We agreed that the site is in better shape than the surrounding historic horse pasture that has thistle, kochia, and bindweed present. We also agreed that revegetation at the site appeared successful, and he recommended to leave the current vegetation in place and begin weed control to prevent kochia and thistle from encroaching from the surrounding areas.
Mr. Kirk, are you qualified to make these vegetative health and plant species determinations?
Yes, much of my education and professional experience requires me to identify plant species and the integration of different ecosystems with plants.
Thank you. Mr. Kirk, do you recall that Mr. Duranlo also testified regarding the statistical methods utilized for background sampling at soil spread field?
Yes, so
And can you describe why it has taken so long for staff to approve the background statistical analysis method for this site?
Yeah, so long story short with that, we began discussion of the required statistical method with COGCC in, I believe, early February of 2022. A meeting was held between Marcom, KPK, and staff to discuss the collected background data and the required background method. Staff indicated to us during that meeting that the current method we utilized was insufficient. Staff then informed us that we would need to conduct a statistical analysis of the background method. Marcom requested guidance on this during that meeting and the statistical method, or on the statistical method. And staff said that they were drafting a guidance document and would provide it to us when it was finalized. We followed up a couple weeks later on that guidance document, and staff had not completed the guidance document and recommended that we use the EPA method, which is the Pro UCL method instead. When we finally submitted a Form 27 with the EPA method statistical analysis in place, the Pro UCL method, staff returned the draft form and indicated that that method was also not sufficient and directed us to use another statistical method, the t-test.
These shifting directives from staff made it hard to achieve closure at the soil spread field site, in your opinion?
I would say so. Shifting between 3 different background methods has made it extremely difficult to make progress at the site. I believe Mr. Duranlo confirmed there is still no guidance on this, and these background determinations are challenging.
Ms. Graber also testified about facility 7 consolidation line. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Can you describe the status of that site?
So this site has benching and shoring, and they're present at the site, as well as adequate fencing. Site work has been postponed to prioritize higher priority sites on the priority ranking sheet. That being said, we have submitted forms to request backfill with some metals in situ, but recently learned that we can't leave these metals in situ, even if not related to KPK's production fluids.
Does that Form 27 specifically this operator, excuse me. Yeah, does that Form 27 specifically this operator comment on the slide that I'm showing you reflect that request?
Yes.
And so this highlighted language talks about the metals exceedances remaining in situ.
Yes.
Consistent with background. That's your operator comment?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recall that Ms. Graber also testified about site progress at Martin Schaefer?
Yes, I do.
Please describe the current status of Martin Schaefer and what remedial work has been performed there.
Site reclamation at this point has been completed, and it was completed last fall. And staff's reclamation specialist confirmed this during a meeting that I had with him in October. Our site visit indicated that germination and revegetation growth was successful. We are just waiting on 4 quarterly groundwater monitoring reports at this point and 4 consistent quarters of clean groundwater to show that we're in compliance here.
And did the first quarter come back clean?
Yes.
In your opinion, is Martin Schaefer close to closure?
Yes, very close.
Ms. Graber also testified about site progress at the Nesu consolidation NOAB site. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Please describe the current status of this site and what remedial work has been performed.
So background sampling and additional confirmation sampling was recently conducted, and that was collected on December 14th with staff's oversight contractor present at the site, Apex. We have received results of the sampling, and we have submitted a remediation plan, which staff has approved and are currently working on our scheduling to hopefully get out there at the end of this week, which is what it's scheduled for, but that's going to be weather pending to conduct further remediation.
So was Ms. Graber correct when she said no recent progress or work has been completed at this site?
No, I believe she misspoke.
Ms. Graber also testified about the UPR 43 Pan Am G NOAB site. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What is the status of this site?
So CPW has been notified on the high priority habitat, which was a requirement, and backfill was requested but denied due to inorganics that remain in situ along the road, which KPK cannot excavate because it's in the right of way. Elevated levels of SAR and EC that remain along the road are indicators of road salts and winter road treatments that may have caused these inorganics. Monitoring wells have been installed at the site, and that was to delineate groundwater, and impacts so far are clean in those monitoring wells.
Thank you. Mr. Kirk, on Thursday, Mr. Duranlo mentioned multiple waste manifest issues. Has Marcom remedied the waste manifest issues, including duplications and missing information?
Yes, Marcom has remedied these. Any omissions of duplications were not inadvertent and have been corrected. There have been no adverse comments, to my knowledge, from staff since implementation of the waste management plan.
That would be the final approved waste management
Yes,
plan?
the final approved plan.
Thank you. Mr. Kirk, can you please describe KPK's implementation of best management practices at CPA locations?
So KPK implements best management practices at all of their sites, following the waste management plan and the COGCC rules. Soil stockpiles reside in lined bermed containment and are labeled with the correct signage, whether it's clean or contaminated. Excavation fencing is erected based upon the geographical location of the excavation itself. Tracking pads, soap fencing, and other BMPs are also implemented on site-specific basis when they are necessary. KPK does have a designated field crew that inspects sites every day, repairing and maintaining BMPs as they're discovered to be delinquent. Defective BMPs are repaired as soon as they are discovered. So we're not just sitting around when stuff's down.
Sure, thanks. Can you describe such BMPs in the next couple of slides that have some of your locations?
Yeah, so on the left-hand side, you'll see Coslet number 3 with a good tracking pad. Minimal tracking, if all. It appears to be effective to me. The James Haley is on the right, and you'll see adequate fencing at this site.
Next slide.
This is photos of the Paul Hines site. You'll see an excavation that's properly shored, and the fencing is 3-strand barbed wire.
Thank you. Ms. Graber and Mr. Duranlo testified that there are inadequate BMPs and fencing at the Kamenish location. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And has the fencing at this site been improved?
Yes, the fencing has been improved greatly. Fencing was upgraded from orange snow fencing to barbed wire, 3-strand barbed wire, for increased longevity and effectiveness. It's hard to see in this photo, but it's definitely there.
Mr. Duranlo also testified about Staff Exhibit 1003, which references inadequate BMPs and fencing at James S. Haley, according to a staff comment on a monthly report submitted in August 2022 for work completed in July. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And has that fencing at James S. Haley since July 2022 been improved?
Yeah, KPK has upgraded its fencing materials at this site to cattle panels with orange snow fencing at the entrance.
Are there pictures that staff showed of sagging fence, or are the pictures of that staff showed of sagging fence during their testimony representative of KP fencing in general?
No, I don't think they are. This is not representative of KPK fencing because if fences sag due to heavy snow or other weather conditions, they are fixed as soon as they are discovered. Again, there is a crew going out to these sites every day, looking at site conditions and making repairs as needed. They can't always make it to every site all day, but they're doing their best. KPK has also upgraded fencing across numerous sites to prevent this from occurring.
You agree with the testimony of Ms. Graber about topsoil protection at Rocky Mountain Fuel Consolidation Line?
No, I don't. There is contaminated soil signage at this site. There's a berm in place. There's liner underneath it or above it. And the stockpile has been removed to the point where it is safe to scrape without ripping the liner.
Mr. Kirk, do you agree with Ms. Graber's description of the restoration and revegetation status of the E. Stiber and H. Hewitt consolidation sites?
No,
last
I don't, and
Thursday?
that's because Ms. Graber did not mention that the landowner requested that we do not revegetate the sites, and he wanted to revegetate them. They asked that we only till the land and then leave as is. Based on these requests, we are actively working to obtain landowner confirmation of that to request a variance.
Mr. Kirk, do you recall that Ms. Graber also testified about asserted land disturbances at the Coslet 3 and Morgan A1 locations?
Yes.
Do you agree with her representation of the status of those sites?
No, the pictures used by staff in I don't think they're representative of Coslet number 3 or tracking pads at other locations. Marcom conducted a site visit last Friday and tracking pad was in good working condition. As for the Morgan site, land disturbances are the result of continuous trespassing. I have observed those trespassings firsthand, and that's been reported to staff. Dumping on the site by the adjacent developers has occurred multiple times.
Did Ms. Graber's demonstrative accurately portray conditions at Premium Turkey Farm, in your opinion?
I would say no. Tremendous progress has been made and conducted at the Premium Turkey Farm, and we have begun to reach a point at that site where continued excavation is unfeasible due to depth and size of the excavation. We recently submitted a Form 27 addressing staff's comments and requested backfill with a proposal to conduct additional investigation via soil borings and monitoring well installation.
Finally, does this photo from Staff Exhibit 1009 from the Koshia site represent KPK work?
No, it does not. This photo shows poorly managed stockpile. That is not a stockpile that's KPK's. It's actually another operator's.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Give me just a second. Okay. At this time, Ms. Stafford would have an opportunity for cross. Ms. Stafford, that was a generous amount of information. Do you desire to have some time to prepare for cross, or are you ready to go?
Thank you, Chair Robbins. If I could. Actually, no, I'm good to go.
All right, then the witness is yours.
Good morning. Sorry, Mr. Kirk. Thanks for being here.
It's all good.
Now, from what I understood from your testimony, is it your testimony here today that much more work on these sites has been done recently?
Yeah, there's been a lot of progress made on these sites.
So that would be at the end of December?
No, since June, since the last hearing.
Okay. And can you tell us approximately when the fencing was repaired at the Haley and the Hines?
That fencing has been in place at the Haley and the Hines for quite a significant, I couldn't tell you without my notes exactly, but a significant amount of time.
Okay. And in the demonstrative that was shown for the Haley, I'm looking at slide 16 here, that date there, you would agree that was from late December of 2022?
Are you talking about the one with fencing?
I am.
Yes.
And is it, and so that fencing was repaired in December 2022 then? Right?
It was repaired before then.
And when was that?
I couldn't tell you without my notes.
Okay. You also testified with respect to the soil spreads field site that, quote, staff agreed the reclamation was successful?
I said revegetation.
Revegetation, excuse me. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
But that's not accurate, an accurate representation of staff's assessment of that site, is it?
It is. I was actually on site with the staff reclamation specialist at the time, and we had actually both agreed on revegetation being successful at the site. And there was, I will caveat that I did say that we would need to, he did indicate that we would need to do some weed control on the surrounding area to prevent kochia and other invasives from encroaching on the soil spread field.
So you're saying staff's assessment, the assessment of staff's reclamation inspector, where he said that the areas surrounding the soil spread field are characterized as a disturbed landscape due to the land use and management. That's incorrect?
No, that's correct. That's the surrounding area, not the soil spread field itself. The surrounding area, which historically was a horse pasture, has significant amounts of kochia, thistle, other stuff as well.
And if you could pause my time here for a second, I need to collect my thought for a second.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize for that. Now, Mr. Kirk, just to conclude here, it's your testimony that there are 9 sites that are, quote, close to no further action. Is that your testimony?
That's correct. That was also in the previous testimonies in the pre-hearing statement.
And you're aware that KPK represented to this commission that they had multiple sites close to no further action at the June hearing too?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And and you agree with the fact that only 3 out of the 58 remediation projects on attachment A have been closed as of this date?
3 have been closed to this date under no further action.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, Mr. Jacobs, rebuttal or redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. At this time, commissioners have questions. Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kirk. This was helpful to get another kind of site-by-site evaluation of it. I want to go into a couple of them that were talked about. First off, you talked about the Grant tank battery. I believe you said on January 24th, an additional form was submitted.
Yes.
Is that correct? Can you go into a little bit more detail about the changes that were made in the January 24th form?
Yes, so staff had recently, or prior to that, returned a draft, Form 2 draft, indicating that more information was required for the proposed soil vapor analysis and or the soil vapor extraction remediation technique that we were going to implement. So we took that form and we took those comments and we implemented those comments and addressed those comments in the new form that we recently submitted for the remediation techniques that we're proposing.
Okay. And have you had any follow-up from staff at this point in time about whether?
Not yet.
Okay. And sorry, that was the 24th, so last Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I want to go into also, I believe you said the UPRR site you talked about.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And so could you go into a little bit more detail why you disagreed with Ms. Graber about the progress made at the UPRR site?
So there's been a lot of back and forth between staff and KPK and Marcom on this site. But analytical has been collected and provided to staff on both soil analysis and groundwater analysis. And groundwater monitoring at this point and analysis from recent monitoring has indicated that groundwater parameters are below regulatory levels. And the only in situ remaining organics, or there are no remaining organics at the UPRG site. The only in situ remaining inorganics are SAR and EC, which are along the road on the south side of the site. And we believe that is actually contributed to like weather condition treatment of the road, so mag chloride and salt added to the road. And we also can't do any further excavation because we are to the point that we are nearly touching the road on that side.
And one thing that was talked about, I believe, by Ms. Graber during her testimony, and I didn't hear with specificity for the UPRR site, was some of the fencing issues. Do you believe the fencing issues are in compliance with the best management practices that you talked about for that site?
So my belief on the fencing issues overall is there is not a identified fence type that is required for each site specific. There's no requirements on fencing, that there only needs to be fencing. Orange fencing is perfectly adequate. For a period of time that is lengthened, I would agree that it could be upgraded. And at that site, it has been upgraded on the roadside to cattle fencing, and it has been maintained. The orange construction fencing on the other side, which is the adjacent property owner side, has been in place and it is maintained. And yes, again, there has been some sagging. As soon as that's been identified, that has been fixed. And that can be caused again by weather, whether it's wind or snow occurring.
And so I want to go into two questions with relation to what you just said there about the weather conditions. First of all, after a snowstorm or something like that, you mentioned that there is a KPK crew that daily goes out to these sites to make sure there's things done, or if something is noticed. Would they check all these different sites after a snowstorm to ensure that that's not happening?
Likely with that crew after a snowstorm, they're likely the crews that are also clearing roads and cleaning up snow at the site to remove it. So access is easier to get to the site. So likely that's not happening at all sites the day after it occurs. But they are continuously going around to these sites in waves, historically, where we know we've had larger issues with wind and or fencing being blown down, to make sure that we get the proper repairs made.
And then the other thing that I wanted to check on is you also said for the fencing BMPs, if you were notified of any kind of issues. We saw several pictures throughout the staff's case in chief where they were showing sagging fences, some in the monthly reports, but some at different times, and saying, here's another one. Were those pictures sent directly to Marcom? Were they sent to KPK? Or how?
Not all of them are. I know that when, and staff even admitted to this during their testimony, that when an inspection is reported to Marcom and KPK, KPK personnel returns to the site and repairs those in a timely fashion.
Okay. And then so let's move on to the Nesu site for a minute. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Could you go over again just quickly, because there was a lot of information going through there site by site, and just to make sure that you have adequate time to talk about the progress of these different sites, I'd just like to go into a little bit more detail of what's happened at that Nesu site.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. So at the Nesu site, staff did state in their testimony that there has been no progress made at that site. And I stated that was untrue because in December, we returned to the site after approval to conduct additional background sampling and further confirmation sampling to confirm whether or not in situ metals were a lab mistake or possibly were, well, if they were correct or a lab mistake. We returned to that site and we collected those samples, and our analysis determined that there still is organics in place in one portion of that excavation, a very small portion, one of the shorter sidewalls. And that was then directed to COGCC staff and provided our findings. And we have provided staff with a plan to move forward with additional reclamation, which we are planning to do at the end of this week. Again, that's weather pending. I think we'll be able to get out there. And then also, you know, we have provided staff with all of the analytical that was previously collected during our first round of sampling as well. They were made knowledgeable about that, and it was provided in Form 27.
And when you do that excavation, is there a chance that you'll find more? Or do you think that traditionally when you do that sample testing that shows the extent of issue?
So there's always a chance to find and uncover something during excavation sampling, pending on excavation access, I will say, because historically there's preferential flow pathways and areas that could be missed during sampling or a visual inspection because it got into a fracture or something else that created a preferential flow pathway that allowed that product to travel further without being identified. And usually that if it does come uncovered, it's during a sampling event because we do a bias sampling, which is required by us to do for COGCC. And so while we're out there sampling, we are looking very hard for these impacts to submit these impacts or the most visually impacted location as our sampling assessment to prove that excavation has been successful.
And would you agree with Ms. Graber's opinion that the Nesu site should be one of the quote simple remediation projects?
Well, I would agree that it could be a simple remediation project. However, I will caveat that with landowner access. It's the same landowner as the Aladkio O'Gorman site, and it has been very difficult. In addition to that, that field is flood irrigated. So access during the flood irrigation season the site is inaccessible due to mud and just it gets really bad.
And how long has that site been open? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, without my notes, I couldn't tell you.
And would you blame that kind of field irrigation as the reason this has not been cleaned up to date?
No, I wouldn't blame it all on that. I would say that other sites have definitely taken priority on the priority list. And I know it's a CPA site and it is an NOAV site, but it does take that into consideration that it is hard to get back there during the summer months. And again, landowner access has been very difficult at that site.
And just wanted to quickly touch on the BMPs a little bit more as well.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the soil stockpiles.
Yeah.
And I know for one of the, again, kind of as it went through quickly through that demonstrative, one of them you talked about, there had been some discussion of like a large stockpile. So it's kind of overflowing the berm and the lining there.
I believe that was the Paul Hines one, right?
I think so.
Okay, so if you looked at that photo in the demonstrative, it's a large stockpile, and I think that there's some concrete that is present within that photo. If you look at it very closely, it's actually within the containment. The soil that you're seeing on the outside of the containment is actually placed on top of the liner when crews are implementing the liner, so it doesn't blow away.
Okay.
So that's clean soil.
And so several of the pictures that were presented throughout testimony have showed some pictures where you can see the lining. And a lot of times there's actually soil on top of the lining. Some of the times it's kind of flowed over. There's some areas where it looks like there may be beyond where the signs are that says clean versus contaminated soil. There's times where you can see like small holes in the lining. Some of those situations, particularly where it's overflowing and you kind of see the liner coming out in the middle of the pile and things like that. Is that part of the best management practices? Does that still meet the best management practices?
So I believe the one that you're referring to is the Rocky Mountain Fuel, where you're talking about it kind of coming out of the front of the containment there. So if you look at that, if you were to look at that site on a ground view and you were standing there, you would see that there is a berm that goes over the top of that section there, and that's kind of like a ramp to enter in and out of the site as it's a pretty big containment. So it's to enter in and out of that containment. So stockpile can be removed and loaded into a truck. And that's kind of how that works on that.
And is that fairly consistent throughout the different sites? the CPA?
Yeah, that's fairly consistent on the larger containments for sure.
Okay. And then my last question, I'll just quickly say, so you testified that for at least some of these sites, you went out there, I believe on Friday. And I apologize if I misquote her, but I believe a lot of the sites Ms. Graber testified she had gone to last Monday, the 23rd, I think it was. And is your testimony that you disagree with her analysis of how some of the sites look, just between her viewing on Monday versus your viewings on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with her testimony at the point that she provided those pictures. But from when we went out and conducted site inspections, there's a different picture because sites are going around and cleaning up BMPs and or over, you know, tracking as they're finding it. So it was cleaned up, and that wasn't because it was found from photos. They did provide an inspection, I believe, on one of their testimonies in the BMP photos. I don't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but once we received that inspection, we did go to the site and we did clean it up.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kirk, for being here today. I missed it in my notes. How long have you worked on these projects for KPK?
I've worked on the projects for KPK since day one at the Martin Schaefer, which predated the GRIP.
Which predated the GRIP. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that you have been involved with the different aspects of implementing the CPA, and so had this role during previous hearings when it was determined that there was not substantial compliance with the CPA.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So based on the testimony that you just gave, that you have been involved with these projects since prior to the CPA, it's fair to say that you were in your role doing your work when this commission found that KPK was not in substantial compliance in previous hearings.
Yes.
And do you feel like between previous hearings and today that there's been some sort of culture shift or change that would indicate that the same people yourself who were doing the work prior to that have changed what they're doing in order to be compliant now?
If you want my personal stance on that, I'll give it to you. And I will say that as a person who is in the field and working with field crews, working with KPK, working on the project management side of things, assisting Kevin or Mr. Takis, assisting Mr. Meese every day since we began, I think that there has been substantial progress. And I say that because I see it. I see the changes in the culture. I see the changes in the personnel. And while I do know that these things take time and there are mishaps and things are forgotten, KPK has gotten tremendously better at the way they implement their BMPs, how they're excavating these sites, how they approach it. And our sampling techniques have gotten much better. Our correspondence with COGCC, I mean, I talk to Nikki, I talk to staff, I talk to him weekly. And I think it's gotten better.
So are you testifying that it wasn't adequate before, but that recently it gotten better?
Yeah, I would testify that before the GRIP was in place, it wasn't great. It has gotten much better. I wouldn't say it's just as of recent. It's been a work in progress since the CPA was approved and the GRIP implementation was approved. And we're building a foundation to a new culture and a new sense of place here. But I definitely think it has progressed and gotten better.
So one of the things that was talked about during Ms. Graber's testimony was an adversarial culture between Marcom, KPK, and staff. I mean, it seems in your testimony that that there is a lot of disagreement from you as an individual between what staff is requesting or what staff expectations are and what you're actually accomplishing on the ground as far as your expectations, and that there doesn't seem to be a lot of understanding or compliance between KPK, Marcom, and staff's expectations, but yet there seems to be kind of pushback indicating that you may or may not believe that staff's expectations are appropriate. That's what I'm insinuating from some of the testimony that you're giving right now. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think with anything, there's going to be professional opinion disagreements. Staff clearly has experience. That's why they're staff. But as a consultant and working with Marcom and, you know, working for several clients, there's been a professional experience and opinion that has been, you know, I've attained myself. Additionally, other individuals also worked a lot with other operators, and you know, there's always going to be a disagreement when it comes to an opinion. But the biggest thing that I think that, I mean, I'm very good at, and I would attest that I think a lot of the other Marcom individuals in KPK, as well as Craig Meese, is when we have a disagreement, we communicate that disagreement and we work with staff to come to a conclusion that suits both opinions best, if that makes sense.
So do you believe that a regulatory environment is a negotiation or a debate between the regulated entity and the regulators?
No, I don't. I don't believe that, but I will caveat that by saying that there's always two ways to get to an end goal. And just because it's not someone's way does not mean it's not the correct way.
So having said that, you seem to indicate that you would prefer to have staff tell you explicitly what to do in a lot of these situations in order to be able to meet the obligations, rather than be able to develop a technique to meet your obligations independently as a professional. And I think a lot of your comments were that you need guidance, you need specificity, you need to be told what to do. And so I wonder how that seems to be in conflict with your previous statement.
So if you want to, I guess, talking about guidance and what to do, the reason I request guidance and I guess request what to do is because, let's say an example would be, I would provide a professional opinion that is a remediation plan and or a remediation progress in place of a site, and I provide 6 different proposals. All 6 of those proposals get to the end goal of completing, and ultimately what we're trying to do here, remove impacts from the soil or groundwater. Those 6 proposals are denied because it is not exactly the way one person sees it or a cumulative group of people see it. That does not mean that I don't have a good professional courtesy and or aspect to see through the project and how it can get to the end goal. It just means that my way of getting to the end goal was not exactly what one other person's way of getting to the end goal was. And so because I have tried numerous types of proposals to get to that end goal and none of them sufficed and or were sufficient, I am asking for guidance on how that end goal would like to be, how that individual would like us to get to that end goal.
Couldn't it be though that that the opinion of staff, the regulator, is that what you were proposing doesn't actually get to the end goal?
I would say yes, but working with other operators and never having a problem with these proposals before, this is the first time I'm seeing this, is usually working with KPK. That's when these proposals don't seem to be approved by staff, is only when I'm working with KPK.
So are you insinuating that staff has some sort of special way of approaching KPK that you don't see with other operators?
I would say so.
Okay. So one of the other questions I have is, like, your testimony seemed to indicate that a bunch of work has happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, a number of the slides that you submitted in that rebuttal indicated that last week or the week before, we just did this, and we just submitted this. And I wonder why there seems to be this increased attempt to comply with the CPA in the last couple of weeks that perhaps wasn't as evident in the last 2 or 3 months.
It
Is
actually.
that an anomaly, or is that just the testimony you gave today? Or
No, it just, I think the reason that we chose the slides that we did was to caveat staff's testimony of sites that recently have not had things done. We have had tremendous work that has been completed and done a lot of work over the last several months, actually since the June hearing. As you guys know, that there was a transition from Ms. Gallus to Mr. Takis. That's not always a smooth selling transition, but we have gotten through it, and we've done a lot of work since then, and also the June hearing. I would caveat that with information that was provided, and we are always recently providing information as much as we can. So that's why, you know, you're given the most recent up-to-date information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that as we're receiving information before that time period this was conducted, we weren't providing that either. We were.
So you think it's fair to say that if you're submitting something in the last week, that staff may or may not actually have had the opportunity to review that, because while you may submit it, doesn't mean it's an adequate submittal, doesn't mean the information's correct, or maybe it is correct and it's adequate. But that over the last week, there may or may not have been time for staff to review that. And so staff's testimony could have been on forms or information that they received 2 or 3 weeks ago when they were addressing the information necessary for this particular hearing, and not what's occurring in the last week or 10 days.
Yeah, but I do believe that there's only a couple examples of that.
What were those examples?
In particular, the Grant tank battery, which was recently submitted. I know that one was for sure. And obviously, yeah, that was recently submitted. So I do not expect staff to have reviewed that at this point. And the UPER 43 Pan Am G, that was also recently submitted. So again, I don't expect staff to have reviewed that at this point.
Made some testimony around tracking pads and fencing and things like that I think were submitted relatively recently, and not necessarily when staff last viewed these particular sites and provided testimony.
No, not at all. But I could pull up photos from, you know, June that were presented in an exhibit that would show the fencing was still in adequate shape at that point.
Sure, but when you're looking at adequate fencing or inadequate fencing, or adequate BMPs or inadequate BMPs, tracking pads, this or that, it's not that at one point in history that they were adequate and so everything's fine. It's that they have to be adequate all the time, 24 hours a day, for the entire time the project is under your supervision. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you there. I would caveat that with an example at the UPER G site, sagging fencing. I'm not really sure that was adequate as far as you know, stating that sagging fencing does not show that the fence is in place and working condition. I mean, it still was properly about 3 foot tall, and it's going to keep pretty much anything that's going to get in that excavation in there. Fencing itself for excavations is a security purpose to keep the honest. If somebody wanted to climb a 10-foot chain link fence, they were going to do that as well. So that's, I mean,
that's your professional opinion on why a BMP is in place for fencing around a site?
No, not by any means. But it's true that fencing is, you know, it's only keeping the honest.
Is that true for tracking pads and other BMPs that are associated with a site?
It could be. I mean, an example, Morgan, there's trespassing at that site all the time from the surrounding development. There's a gate in place there, but it's pretty easy. You know, it's not hard for somebody to drive up on the curb and go around the gate.
not to beleaguer this point, but I do struggle with this a little bit. For the last year or so, there's been issues with snow fencing and maintenance of snow fencing on sites throughout operations that I've heard about. I mean, at what point, realizing that you're continuing to have issues with a particular material or a particular style of fence that is clearly not going to be able to meet the expectations of staff as far as having adequate BMPs for these sites, do you acknowledge the situation and address that with either different fencing or additional maintenance and upkeep of these sites in order to ensure that they're adequately handled?
Yeah, so I would say that we already have started upgrading this. Examples include the cattle fencing that's in place in a lot of staff's photos, or barbed wire, which was discussed with staff to start being in place. I'm not a super heavy advocate of barbed wire in certain circumstances, just because obviously, you know, public health, you know, kid comes around an excavation, but in circumstances where it's just cattle in a field or out in the middle of, you know, and excavations out in the middle of an ag field, I think BMPs such as barbed wire fencing is more than adequate. And I think we've already shown that we have started addressing those at sites that do need upkeep.
So one other question, because I'm struggling with a little bit of your testimony on this, is it seems like a lot of the testimony that you provided absolved responsibility from yourself and from KPK for responsibility of the testimony that came from both Mr. Durando and Ms. Graber. It was another person, or it was you know, road treatment that caused it, or it was a landowner that had the issue, or it was weather, or it was staff delays in reviewing things. I mean, is that what you feel is the problem here? Is that some other entity, some other element is the one that's responsible for you not being able to handle certain situations that you may be expected to handle by staff?
Nope. I don't believe I really stated at all that everybody else was our problem. In fact, I do think that there is, with any remediation project, there is going to be lots of circumstances and problems that occur that may prevent excavation or further work from being done. But by no means do I alleviate KPK or MARCOM of continuing to conduct work and or get in touch with landowners or follow up with COGCC and change things on the priority review list. Which is what we do. By no means do I alleviate that responsibility from us. I'm just saying that there are other circumstances that do come into play when you're talking remedial progress.
Thank you.
Other commissioners with questions? All right, I'm seeing no further questions. Mr. Jacobs, you have an opportunity for any redirect as a result of commissioner questions.
No redirect, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kirk.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, and Ms. Stafford, let's check in. We're kind of at the lunchtime hour. Mr. Jacobs, do you want to provide inquiry into the rest of your rebuttal case? What are you thinking? I'm trying to figure out if we should go forward or if we should take a break or what.
Given that it's quarter past the noon hour, I do think that a lunch break would be advisable. We have two more rebuttal witnesses. One, neither of them terribly long. Mr. Kirk's rebuttal testimony was longer than the other two, but I have reserved 11 minutes for closing. And if we could get a time check, I think I was at 23 minutes maybe.
Yes, 22 minutes and 59 seconds for KPK and 11 minutes and 42 seconds for staff.
All right, then why don't we take a 45-minute break for lunch, give everybody a chance to regroup and return at let's say 105.
Very good. Thank you.